Cole Mercer had faced down armed men without flinching, but nothing in his violent past prepared him for this. The weakening cries of his infant son growing softer with each passing hour. The baby's lips had gone pale, his small body trembling in Cole's calloused hands as he rode into a town that looked half dead itself. No milk, no wife, no hope, just a desperate father watching his child slip away, knowing that every second of silence from those tiny lungs might be the last. The sun was setting on more than just the day, and Cole Mercer was about to discover that some battles can't be won with a gun. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop a comment with your city below. I want to see just how far this story travels. And if you're ready to see whether Cole saves his son, hit that like button and stay with me until the very end. The town of Ashford Creek didn't welcome strangers, and it sure as hell didn't welcome trouble. Cole Mercer was both. His horse moved slow through the rutted main street, each step kicking up dust that hung in the amber light like a curtain between him and salvation. The buildings on either side stood weathered and gray, their paint long surrendered to the prairie wind. A few faces appeared in windows, suspicious eyes that tracked his progress before disappearing behind faded curtains. Cole barely noticed them. His entire world had narrowed to the bundle pressed against his chest, wrapped in a blanket that had once been white but now carried the stains of 100 desperate miles. The baby, his son, Thomas, had been crying for hours. Now he'd gone quiet, and that silence was worse than any scream. "Come on, boy," Cole whispered, his voice hoarse from days without proper water. "Just hold on a little longer." Thomas's face was flushed, his small mouth working uselessly at the air. 4 days old, maybe 5. Cole had lost count of time since Sarah died bringing him into the world. 4 days without his mother's milk, without anything but sugar water Cole had tried to dribble into that tiny mouth. 4 days of watching his son fade. The horse stopped at a water trough outside what looked like a general store. Cole dismounted, his legs nearly buckling after so many hours in the saddle. He'd ridden through 2 nights without stopping, pushing both himself and the mare past any reasonable limit. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the October chill, and his hands shook as he adjusted his grip on the baby. A woman emerged from the store, middle-aged and stern-faced, carrying a basket of vegetables. Cole moved toward her, stumbling slightly. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice cracking. "Please, my son needs milk. Do you have any, or know where I might—" She looked at him, really looked, taking in his trail-worn clothes, the gun at his hip, the desperate edge in his eyes. Her gaze dropped to the bundle in his arms, and something flickered across her face. Not sympathy. Recognition, maybe. The kind that comes from seeing trouble before it announces itself. "We don't have nothing for drifters," she said, stepping past him. "Especially not your kind." "My kind?" Cole turned, following her. "Ma'am, I'm just a man with a hungry baby. I can pay—" "Can't spend money from a dead man." She didn't look back. "Word travels fast, even out here." "Cole Mercer, $50 bounty. We don't want that kind of trouble in Ashford Creek." The name hit the street like a stone dropped in still water. Faces that had been merely curious turned hard. A man who'd been sweeping the boardwalk outside the saloon stopped mid-stroke, his hand drifting toward his belt. Across the street, someone disappeared into a building with the kind of urgency that meant they were fetching a gun or a lawman, maybe both. Cole's jaw tightened. He'd known this moment would come eventually, had been running from it since he left the Wyoming territory. But knowing didn't make it easier, especially not with Thomas growing weaker in his arms. "That bounty's a lie," Cole said, loud enough for anyone listening to hear. "I never killed that man. Grant Hollis set me up and I can prove it, but right now none of that matters. What matters is my son needs milk, and I'm asking, begging, someone in this town to help him." A few people had gathered now, maintaining careful distance. An old man spat tobacco juice into the street. A younger woman clutched her shawl tighter, her face showing the kind of pity that doesn't translate into action. A shopkeeper stood in his doorway, arms crossed, watching. "Please," Cole said again, hating the crack in his voice, hating how exposed he felt. In his old life, the one that ended when Sarah's fever broke and took her with it, he'd never begged for anything. But that man was gone, burned away in the fire of watching his wife die in a cold camp with no doctor, no help, Nothing but his useless hands and her final request. Save our baby, whatever it takes. There's a wet nurse 2 towns over, someone called out. That's the best you'll get. 2 towns over. At least 30 miles, probably more. Thomas didn't have 30 miles left in him. Hell, Cole wasn't sure he did either. Thomas made a small sound then, not quite a cry, more like a whimper. The weakness in it sent ice through Cole's veins. He pulled back the blanket, looking down at his son's face. The baby's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. His skin had taken on a grayish tinge that Cole recognized from men he'd seen die on battlefields years ago. No. The word came out fierce, desperate. No, you don't get to quit on me, boy. You hear me? Your mama fought too damn hard to bring you here. He looked up at the gathered townspeople, saw them watching his breakdown with the detached interest of people observing a tragedy that wasn't theirs. Something inside Cole cracked then, not broke, but transformed. The part of him that still cared about pride, about dignity, about what he looked like to strangers, it just let go. He sank to his knees in the middle of the street, dust settling on his worn trousers, and held his son up like an offering. Somebody help him, Cole said, and his voice was raw, stripped of everything but naked truth. Please. He's innocent. Whatever you think I am, whatever I've done, he's got nothing to do with it. He's 4 days old and he's dying, and I can't save him alone. Somebody, anybody, please. The silence that followed was broken only by the evening wind and the distant creak of a shop sign swinging on rusty hinges. Cole saw the faces around him, saw them weighing his plea against their fear, against the bounty, against the disruption his presence meant for their quiet town. One by one, they turned away. The old man spat again and shuffled off. The woman with the shawl whispered something to the person beside her and retreated into a shop. The shopkeeper simply stepped back and closed his door, the click of the latch loud in the gathering dusk. Cole stayed on his knees, Thomas cradled against his chest, and felt something close to the end settling over them both. He'd faced death before, had dealt it out more times than he cared to remember, in a war that seemed like someone else's life now. But this was different. This was watching death come for the one pure thing he'd ever had a hand in creating and being powerless to stop it. I'm sorry, Sarah, he whispered to the baby, to the memory of the woman who'd loved him despite everything he'd been. I tried. I swear I tried. Then a voice, clear and calm, cut through his despair. Bring him inside. Cole's head snapped up. A woman stood in the doorway of a small building he'd taken for abandoned. Its paint was faded, its windows dusty, easy to overlook among the more prosperous establishments. She was perhaps 30, dressed in a simple gray dress with an apron, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her face was composed, unreadable, but her eyes, gray-blue like storm clouds, held something that looked almost like recognition. Did you hear me? She said, her tone firm. Get up and bring the baby inside before you put on any more of a show. Cole staggered to his feet, his legs protesting, his entire body suddenly aware of how close to collapse he was. He moved toward her, half expecting her to change her mind, to slam the door in his face like the others had with their silence. But she stepped aside, holding the door open. The interior of the building was dim after the brightness outside, and it took Cole's eyes a moment to adjust. The front room was set up as an apothecary, shelves lined with jars and bottles, a counter with a scale, the sharp, clean smell of herbs and compounds. Everything was meticulously organized, almost severe in its order. Back room, the woman said, moving past him to lead the way. Quickly, Cole followed her through a doorway into what looked like living quarters, a small kitchen, a table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. She was already lighting a lamp, the warm glow pushing back the shadows. Let me see him, she said, turning to face Cole. He hesitated, some deep instinct making him reluctant to hand over his son even now. The woman seemed to understand. She didn't reach for the baby, didn't push. She just waited, her hands loose at her sides, her expression patient. My name is Eleanor Hayes, she said quietly. I'm an apothecary, and I've delivered enough babies to know when one's in trouble. If you want him to live, you need to trust me. Right now. Something in her voice, The certainty, the lack of false comfort, cut through Cole's hesitation. He carefully unwrapped Thomas and held him out. Eleanor took the baby with practiced ease, her hands gentle but efficient as she examined him. She carried him to the table, laying him on a clean cloth she spread out with one hand while supporting his head with the other. Cole watched her work, his heart hammering against his ribs. She felt Thomas's forehead, checked his mouth, listened to his breathing. Her face revealed nothing, but her movements had the quick precision of someone working against time. "When did he last eat?" she asked. "This morning. Sugar water. It's all I had. Before that—" Cole rubbed his face, trying to remember through the fog of exhaustion. "Yesterday, maybe. He won't take much. He's getting weaker." Eleanor nodded, still examining the baby. "He's severely dehydrated and malnourished. His mother? Dead. Fever took her hours after the birth. There was no one else. No town close enough to—" Cole's voice caught. "I've been riding hard, trying to find help. Every place I stopped, they either had nothing or they recognized my name." "The bounty," Eleanor said, not making it a question. "It's a lie. I didn't kill Marcus Hollis. His brother Grant set me up to cover his own crime, but proving it—" Cole shook his head. "That doesn't matter now. All that matters is Thomas." Eleanor looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, taking in more than just his appearance. Cole had the uncomfortable feeling of being read like one of her apothecary labels. Ingredients, purpose, warnings, all laid bare. "What matters," she said finally, "is whether you're willing to do whatever it takes to save him." Anything," Cole said without hesitation. "I've got money. Not much, but it's yours. If you need me to leave town after, I will. If you need me to turn myself in to clear your name of helping me, I'll do that too. Just save my son." Eleanor turned back to Thomas, her jaw tight. "Money won't help him. He needs milk, and he needs it now. Not formula, not sugar water. Real milk from a woman who's nursing. And I'm the only option you have." The words hung in the air between them. Cole processed what she was saying, understanding dawning slowly through his exhaustion. "You have a child?" he asked. Something flickered across Eleanor's face, pain, old and deep. "I did. Elizabeth. She died 8 months ago. Pneumonia. She was 6 months old." The grief in those simple words was like a physical presence in the room. Cole saw it in the way Eleanor's shoulders tensed, in the way her hands paused briefly on Thomas before continuing their examination. He understood that grief had been drowning in his own version of it since Sarah died. "I'm sorry," he said, because there was nothing else to say. Eleanor nodded once, a sharp movement. "I still have milk. Not as much as I did, but enough. The question is whether you're willing to accept help from a stranger, especially one this town has already decided isn't quite right." "Isn't quite right?" "I'm a woman who runs her own business, who never married, who lost a child without a husband to mourn with her. That makes me suspect by nature." Her tone was matter-of-fact, almost challenging. Add to that the fact that I'll be helping a wanted man, and you can imagine how popular this will make me. Cole looked at her, at the set of her jaw and the steadiness in her eyes, and saw something he recognized, someone who'd been pushed to the edges of society, who'd learned to survive there. Someone who understood what it meant to be alone. "Why?" he asked. "Why help me when everyone else turned away?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, her hand resting gently on Thomas's chest, feeling the shallow rise and fall of his breathing. When she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "Because I know what it's like to watch a child die and be powerless to stop it. Because I spent months wishing someone, anyone, could have saved Elizabeth, and no one could." She looked up at Cole, and her eyes were fierce. "And because this child can be saved, and I'll be damned if I let him die when I have the means to help him." She didn't wait for Cole's response. Instead, she moved to a chair by the table, pulling it closer to the lamp. She began unbuttoning her dress with brisk, practical movements, no hesitation or self-consciousness. Cole turned away, giving her privacy, feeling the weight of what she was offering, not just the physical act of nursing his son, but the vulnerability, the trust, the breaking of every social boundary that governed their world. "You can look," Eleanor said after a moment. "This isn't about modesty. It's about survival." Cole turned back slowly. Eleanor had Thomas cradled in her arms, positioned against her breast. The baby's mouth was working instinctively, searching, and when he found what he needed, he latched on with desperate hunger. The sound of Thomas feeding, small, wet, alive, was the most beautiful thing Cole had ever heard. His knees went weak with relief so intense it felt like pain. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Easy," Eleanor said, watching him. "Sit down before you fall down." Cole collapsed into the other chair, his hands shaking. He watched his son nurse, watched the color slowly begin to return to that tiny face, watched the transformation from dying to living happen right before his eyes. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice wrecked. "Thank you doesn't even begin to—" "Then don't," Eleanor interrupted. "Save your gratitude. He's not out of danger yet. He needs regular feeding for the next several days at least, maybe longer. And you—" She looked at him critically. "When did you last eat? Sleep?" Cole tried to remember. 2 days? 3? "I don't know." Eleanor sighed. "There's bread and cheese in the cupboard over there. Cold chicken from yesterday. Eat. Then we'll figure out what comes next." "I should stand watch. If someone recognized me, if someone comes, we'll deal with it. Right now, you're no good to anyone half dead from exhaustion. Eat." It wasn't a suggestion. Cole found himself obeying, moving to the cupboard on autopilot. The bread was fresh, the cheese sharp and good. He ate mechanically, barely tasting it, his eyes never leaving Thomas. The baby fed for several minutes before falling asleep at Eleanor's breast, milk-drunk and content. She adjusted her dress carefully, keeping him warm against her, and began to rock gently in the chair. The lamplight cast soft shadows across her face, and for the first time Cole noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the weariness that ran deeper than one sleepless night. "You should rest too," he said quietly. "I will. But first we need to talk about tomorrow." Eleanor's voice was steady, practical. "Come morning, word will spread that I'm harboring you. The law might come. Bounty hunters definitely will. We need a plan." Cole set down the bread, his appetite gone. "I won't bring trouble to your door. I can leave before but... And take the baby where? He needs to feed every few hours. You think you'll find another woman willing to nurse a stranger's child?" Eleanor shook her head. "No. If you run, he dies, so we don't run. We face whatever comes." "You don't know what you're signing up for," Cole said. "Grant Hollis is vicious. He killed his own brother and framed me for it. He won't let me live long enough to tell that story." "But then we'd better make sure you survive long enough to tell it." Eleanor's eyes met his, unflinching. "I lost one child to forces beyond my control. I won't lose another if there's anything I can do to prevent it, even if that child isn't mine." The simple declaration hit Cole harder than he expected. He saw in her face the same desperation that had driven him to his knees in the street, the need to save something, to make some kind of meaning from loss. "Why?" he asked again. "Really why? You don't know me. You don't know if I'm telling the truth about the bounty." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I know what a guilty man looks like. I know what fear looks like. And I know what love looks like." She glanced up at Cole. "What I saw in that street wasn't a killer protecting himself. It was a father trying to save his son. That's all I need to know." Outside, full darkness had fallen. The sounds of Ashford Creek settling in for the night drifted through the walls. Distant voices, a dog barking, the creak of wagon wheels. Normal sounds from a normal town, unaware that in this small room, a fragile alliance had been forged between two broken people and one helpless child. Cole moved to the window, carefully pulling aside the curtain to look out. The street was mostly empty now, just a few stragglers making their way home. But in the shadows between buildings, he thought he saw movement, someone watching, waiting. "They know I'm here," he said quietly. "Of course they do." Eleanor didn't sound surprised. "By morning, half the territory will know. The question is what they'll do about it. If the sheriff comes, Sheriff Yates is a decent man, mostly. He'll want to hear your side before he makes any decisions." Eleanor shifted Thomas carefully, preparing to lay him in a makeshift bed she'd created from a drawer lined with soft blankets. The real problem isn't the law. It's what comes after. Cole understood. Bounty hunters didn't care about truth or justice. They cared about $50 and wouldn't ask questions before shooting. And if Grant had sent men specifically to hunt him down, which seemed likely, they'd be even more dangerous. "I should sleep in the stable," Cole said. "Keep watch from there. If trouble comes, better it doesn't find me in your home." Eleanor carefully laid Thomas down, tucking the blankets around him with gentle precision. The baby stirred but didn't wake, his small chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of healthy sleep. "You'll sleep here," Eleanor said firmly. "You can take the floor by the stove. I'll wake you when he needs to feed again, which will be in a few hours." She met his protest with a raised hand. "I'm not being charitable, Mr. Mercer. I'm being practical. If someone breaks in to claim that bounty, I want you between them and this baby. Understood?" Cole found himself almost smiling despite everything. Understood. Eleanor moved around the small room with quiet efficiency, pulling out blankets and a worn pillow, creating a sleeping space near the stove that still held warmth from earlier cooking. Cole watched her, noting the way she moved through her own space, confident, economical, someone used to managing alone. "Eleanor," he said as she finished arranging the bedding, "what you did today, what you're doing, I know it's not just about Thomas. You're putting everything at risk, your business, your reputation, maybe your life." She straightened, meeting his eyes directly. "My reputation was ruined the day I had a child without a husband. My business survives because I'm good at what I do, and people need medicine more than they need to judge me. As for my life," she paused, something complicated crossing her face. "I've been surviving, Mr. Mercer. Just surviving. Maybe it's time I tried living again, even if that means taking a risk." Before Cole could respond, a sound cut through the night, harsh, deliberate. Someone pounding on the shop door. They both froze. Thomas stirred in his drawer bed but didn't wake. The pounding came again, more insistent. "Eleanor Hayes," a man's voice called out, rough and demanding. "Open up! We know you got that outlaw in there." Cole's hand went to his gun, but Eleanor caught his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "No," she said quietly. "Not yet. Let me handle this." She moved toward the front room, her bearing calm and unafraid. Cole followed, staying in the shadows where he could see without being easily seen. Eleanor opened the door just wide enough to speak through the gap. Two men stood outside, one older, burly, wearing a deputy's badge. The other younger, lean, with the hungry look of someone who saw opportunity in other people's trouble. "Deputy Warren," Eleanor said evenly. "What can I do for you at this late hour?" "You know damn well what," the deputy said. "Cole Mercer. Is he in there?" "And if he is?" The deputy's face reddened. "Then you're harboring a wanted fugitive. That's a crime, Eleanor. I don't want to arrest you, but—" "Cole Mercer is wanted for questioning in Wyoming territory," Eleanor interrupted. "Not for any crime committed in this town or this county. Last I checked, deputy, offering shelter to a traveler isn't illegal, regardless of what rumors follow him." "There's a bounty." "Bounties aren't law," Eleanor said sharply. "They're incentive for violence. If you want to arrest Mr. Mercer, show me a warrant. Otherwise, I'll thank you to let me get back to my evening." The younger man spat into the dirt. $50 says we don't need a warrant." $50 says you're about to attempt murder for hire," Eleanor countered, "in front of a witness wearing a badge. How do you think that'll play in court, Deputy Warren?" The deputy shifted uncomfortably. Cole could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Duty versus popularity, law versus easy money. Finally, Warren turned to the younger man. "Back off, Cal. This ain't how we do things." "The hell it ain't," Cal protested. "Everyone knows—" "I said back off." The deputy's hand moved to his gun, not threatening, but warning. "Go home. Sleep it off. We'll sort this proper in the morning." Cal glared at Eleanor, then at the deputy, then spat again and stalked off into the darkness. Warren watched him go before turning back to Eleanor. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "Come morning, we'll have to sort this proper. Sheriff's going to want to talk to Mercer. Best if you convince him to come in peaceful." "Best if you convince the sheriff to listen with an open mind," Eleanor replied. "This man's been accused, not convicted. There's a difference." Warren nodded slowly. Maybe, but you're playing a dangerous game, Eleanor. Not everyone in this town's going to be as patient as me. Then I suggest you do your job and keep the peace, Deputy. That's what the badge is for, isn't it? She closed the door without waiting for an answer, sliding the bolt home with a solid click. For a moment she stood with her back to the door, her eyes closed, her breathing carefully controlled. Then she turned to find Cole watching from the shadows. Well, she said dryly, that went about as well as expected. You shouldn't have done that, Cole said. You just made yourself a target. I was already a target the moment I let you through my door. At least now everyone knows where I stand. Eleanor moved past him, back toward the room where Thomas slept. Get some rest, Mr. Mercer. Something tells me tomorrow's going to be a very long day. Cole wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she could still step back, could still claim she'd been coerced or tricked. But looking at the set of her jaw and the steel in her eyes, he knew it would be useless. Eleanor Hayes had made her choice, and she wasn't the kind of woman who unmade decisions once they were set. He settled onto the bedding by the stove, his gun within easy reach, his ears tuned to every sound from outside. The night stretched ahead, full of unknown threats and uncertain futures. But for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Cole wasn't alone in facing them. Across the room, Eleanor sat in her chair, her eyes on the drawer where Thomas slept. In the lamplight, her face showed the traces of old grief and new determination, the complicated mathematics of someone who'd lost everything and found an unexpected reason to keep fighting. Neither of them slept much that night. They took turns watching, Eleanor over the baby, Cole over the street outside. And in the quiet hours before dawn, as Thomas woke hungry and Eleanor fed him again with gentle competence, something shifted between them. Not trust exactly, not yet, but the beginning of it. The first fragile threads of an alliance forged in desperation and maintained by sheer stubborn will. When morning light finally crept through the windows, painting everything in shades of gray and gold, Cole found Eleanor already awake, already dressed, already preparing for whatever the day would bring. Thomas will need to eat again soon, she said, her tone brisk and practical. After that, we should talk strategy. If we're going to clear your name, we'll need more than just your word against Grant Hollis's. You believe me? Cole said, surprised by how much that mattered. Eleanor looked at him over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. I believe you love your son. I believe you're desperate enough to be telling the truth. And I believe that if I'm wrong about you, I'll figure it out soon enough. She turned back to the stove where coffee was beginning to boil. Besides, I've already committed to this path. Might as well see where it leads. Outside, Ashford Creek was waking up. Cole heard voices, the sound of shops opening, normal life resuming. But nothing about this day would be normal. Word had spread. The town knew. And somewhere out there, people were making decisions about what to do with the knowledge that a wanted man had taken shelter in their midst. Cole moved to the window again, watching the street fill with morning traffic. He saw people glancing toward Eleanor's shop, saw them talking in clusters, saw the way news moved through a small town like water finding cracks. They're planning something, he said quietly. Of course they are. Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee, bringing one to Cole. The question is whether they'll let the law handle it, or whether they'll take matters into their own hands. She stood beside him at the window, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the fine scars on her hands from years of working with herbs and compounds that burned or cut. She was taller than Sarah had been, built stronger, with the kind of solid presence that came from years of carrying weight alone. Thank you, Cole said again, because he needed her to understand. For Thomas. For me. For all of it. Eleanor sipped her coffee, her eyes on the street. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Mercer. We've got a long road ahead, and I'm not sure either of us will survive it whole. She glanced at him, something almost like a smile touching her lips. But we'll die trying, won't we? Yes, ma'am, Cole said. I expect we will. In his drawer bed, Thomas stirred and made a small sound. Eleanor moved to him immediately, lifting him with practiced care. The baby's eyes opened, dark blue like his mother's, and he looked up at Eleanor with complete trust. Cole watched them together, this woman who'd buried a child and the child who'd lost his mother, and felt something catch in his chest. Not quite hope. He was too battered for that yet. but something close to it. A sense that maybe, just maybe, they'd all found something worth fighting for. Whatever came next, law or lawlessness, truth or consequences, they'd face it together. A desperate father, a grieving woman, and a helpless child bound by circumstance and choice into something that looked almost like family. The sun rose higher, burning off the morning chill. And in that small room above an apothecary shop, 3 people who'd been alone began learning what it meant to be something else. The knock came just after 8, sharp and official. Cole had been expecting it, but his hand still moved instinctively toward his gun before Eleanor's glance stopped him. "Let me," she said quietly, handing Thomas to Cole. The baby had just finished feeding, his small body warm and content against Cole's chest. "Stay back unless things go wrong." She opened the door to find Sheriff Yates standing there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. He was older than his deputy, probably close to 60, with gray threading through his brown hair and the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades trying to keep peace in places that didn't want it. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying a note of resigned disappointment, "you know why I'm here." "I do. You want to talk to Mr. Mercer about charges that were filed 300 miles away by a man with every reason to lie." Eleanor didn't step aside. "Are you here to arrest him, Sheriff? Because if you are, I'll need to see that warrant Deputy Warren mentioned last night." Yates sighed, the sound of a tired man dealing with complications he didn't need. "I don't have a warrant. What I have is a telegraph from Wyoming saying Cole Mercer is wanted for questioning in the murder of Marcus Hollis. That's not the same as a conviction, but it's enough that I can't just ignore the man's presence in my town." "Then question him," Eleanor said simply. "Right here, right now. He's not running." The sheriff's eyes moved past her to where Cole stood in the shadows, Thomas cradled in his arms. Something shifted in Yates's expression, surprise maybe, or recognition that whatever he'd expected to find, it wasn't this. "That his child?" Yates asked. "Yes, sir," Cole said, stepping forward into the light. 4 days old. His mother died in childbirth. I've been trying to get him somewhere safe, somewhere he could be fed and cared for. Miss Hayes is the first person who offered to help." Yates studied him for a long moment, taking in Cole's haggard appearance, the gentle way he held the baby, the defensive stance that spoke of a man ready to fight, but hoping he wouldn't have to. "Come in, Sheriff," Eleanor said, finally stepping aside. "This conversation doesn't need an audience." The sheriff entered, removing his hat and turning it slowly in his hands. The room suddenly felt smaller with his presence, the air thick with tension. Eleanor closed the door and moved to stand beside Cole, a positioning that wasn't lost on Yates. "You're putting yourself in a difficult spot, Eleanor," the sheriff said, "harboring a wanted man. He's not wanted. He's sought for questioning. There's a legal difference, and you know it." Eleanor's voice was crisp, precise. "And I'm not harboring anyone. I'm providing medical assistance to an infant in distress and shelter to his father. Show me the law that prohibits that." Yates rubbed his face, looking even more tired. "The law is one thing, a $50 bounty is another. You've got men in this town who'd shoot Mercer just for the money, warrant or no warrant." "Then I suggest you control your town, Sheriff," Eleanor said sharply. "That's what we pay you for." "Eleanor." "No." She cut him off, her composure cracking just slightly to show the steel underneath. "I've lived in Ashford Creek for 6 years. I've patched up half this town when they were sick or injured. I've delivered their babies and eased their dying. I've never asked for special treatment, never caused trouble, never given you reason to question my character. And the first time I ask you to do your job and protect someone who needs it, you're going to tell me it's too difficult?" The sheriff's jaw tightened. Cole saw him wrestling with something. Duty, maybe, or politics, or just the simple calculus of trying to keep everyone safe in a situation where that might not be possible. "Tell me your side," Yates said finally, looking at Cole. "Start from the beginning." Cole shifted Thomas carefully, the baby's weight both burden and anchor. "I worked for Grant Hollis up in Wyoming. Ranch hand, mostly honest work. His brother Marcus ran a freight business, and there was bad blood between them over an inheritance. Marcus got the bulk of their father's estate, and Grant never forgave him for it." "That's motive for Grant, not you," Yates observed. "Yes, sir. But I was there the night Marcus died. Grant asked me to ride into town, deliver some papers to his brother. Said it was business, a peace offering. I went, found Marcus in his office with his ledgers. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about nothing important. Then I left. Cole's voice was steady, but his eyes held the memory of that night. Next morning, Marcus was dead, shot in the back, and Grant was telling everyone I'd done it, that he'd sent me there to collect a debt, and I'd killed his brother when he refused to pay. Witnesses? Yates asked. None that would speak for me. Grant owns half the territory. Anyone who works for him knows better than to cross him. Cole's grip on Thomas tightened slightly. But I didn't do it, Sheriff. I swear on my son's life, I didn't pull that trigger. Then who did? Grant himself, most likely, or someone he hired. Marcus kept detailed records of every business transaction. If those ledgers ever came to light, they'd show Grant had been skimming from the freight business for years. That's what I think Marcus was going to confront him about, why Grant had to silence him. Yates was quiet, processing this. Those ledgers still exist? If they do, Grant has them locked up tight. I tried to tell the marshal in Wyoming, but Grant got to him first with his story. By the time I realized I was being framed, there was already a warrant being drawn up, so I ran. Cole looked down at Thomas, his expression softening. Then Sarah took sick. We were camped out in the mountains trying to get to Montana where I might find work under a different name. The baby came early, and the fever that had been building in her just took over. She died 3 hours after he was born, and I've been running ever since, trying to keep him alive. The room was silent except for the ticking of Eleanor's mantel clock and the small sounds Thomas made in his sleep. Sheriff Yates studied Cole with the careful assessment of a man who'd spent years reading people, trying to separate truth from lies. That's a hell of a story, he said finally. It's the truth, Cole replied. Maybe, but truth and proof are different things, especially when there's money involved. Yates turned to Eleanor. You believe him? Eleanor didn't hesitate. I do. Based on what? You've known him less than a day. Based on the fact that he was willing to die in that street begging for help for his child. Based on the way he looks at that baby like nothing else in the world matters. Based on instinct, Sheriff, and mine's usually good. Eleanor's chin lifted slightly. And based on the fact that if he were really a cold-blooded murderer, he'd have shot his way out of here last night instead of sleeping on my floor and letting Deputy Warren walk away. Yates absorbed this, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he put his hat back on, the gesture signaling a decision made. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Officially, I'm conducting an investigation into the charges against Mr. Mercer. That means he stays put in Ashford Creek until I can get more information from Wyoming. It also means he's under my protection, which should discourage any bounty hunters from trying anything stupid. He fixed Cole with a hard stare. But if you run, I'll assume guilt and come after you myself. Understood? Yes, sir, Cole said. I'm not running. Not anymore. Good, because that baby deserves better than a father on the run. Yates moved toward the door, then paused. Eleanor, I'll post Warren outside tonight, just as a precaution. And Cole, stay out of sight as much as possible. The less people see you, the less trouble we'll have. After the sheriff left, Eleanor sagged slightly against the doorframe, the tension draining from her shoulders. Cole watched her, seeing for the first time how much that confrontation had cost her. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Defend me like that. Yes, I did. Eleanor straightened, meeting his eyes. I told you last night, I'm committed to this path. That means all the way, not just when it's convenient. Thomas stirred in Cole's arms, making small, hungry sounds. Eleanor moved toward them immediately, her practical nature reasserting itself. He needs to eat again. Give him here. She took the baby, settling into her chair with the ease of practice. As Thomas began to nurse, she looked up at Cole. You should eat something too, and then we need to talk about what comes next. Cole moved to the cupboard, pulling out bread and the remaining cheese, but he had no appetite. He stood at the window instead, watching the street outside. People were moving about their business, but he noticed how many of them glanced toward Eleanor's shop, how conversation seemed to pause when they passed. They're scared, he said. Of course they are. You represent danger, uncertainty. People don't like either of those things. Eleanor shifted Thomas to her other side, her movements practiced and gentle. But fear makes people do stupid things. We need to be ready for that. What would you suggest? Eleanor was quiet for a moment, thinking. We need to change the narrative. Right now, you're just a wanted man with a bounty on his head. We need to make you human, make them see you as a father trying to protect his child, not a criminal on the run. How do we do that? We don't hide. Eleanor's voice was firm. Tomorrow, when Thomas is stronger, we go out. We walk through town, let people see you with him. Let them see that you're not some dangerous outlaw, you're just a man who loves his son. Cole turned to stare at her. That's insane. We'd be making ourselves targets. We're already targets. At least this way, we control the story. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Trust me. I know this town. They're good people mostly, just scared and uncertain. Give them something to believe in besides Grant Hollis's lies, and they'll surprise you. Before Cole could argue, another knock sounded at the door. This one was different, hesitant, almost apologetic. Eleanor frowned, carefully handing Thomas back to Cole before answering. A young woman stood outside, maybe 20, holding a covered basket. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before speaking. Miss Hayes, she said quietly, I heard about the baby. I brought some things. She held out the basket. Diapers, some blankets my son's outgrown, a few jars of mashed vegetables for when he's older. I thought you might need them. Eleanor took the basket, surprise flickering across her face. That's very kind of you, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you. The young woman nodded, still nervous. My husband doesn't know I'm here. He says we should stay out of it, but... She glanced past Eleanor toward where Cole stood with Thomas. I had a baby last year. I know how hard it is, especially without help. And I figure any man who'd ride that hard to save his child can't be all bad, no matter what people say. Tell your husband he raised a good woman, Eleanor said gently, and tell him we appreciate the kindness, even if he doesn't approve. After Mrs. Patterson left, Eleanor set the basket on the table and began going through it. The items were well used but clean, practical gifts from someone who understood need. Well, she said, something almost like hope in her voice. Maybe we're not as alone as we thought. The day wore on. Thomas ate and slept, growing stronger with each passing hour. Cole took turns with Eleanor watching him, marveling at how quickly the baby had gone from dying to thriving. By afternoon, Thomas's color was good, his cries strong and healthy, his eyes bright when he was awake. He looks like his mother, Cole said during one of these wakeful periods, watching Thomas track movement with his dark blue eyes. She had that same expression when she was thinking hard about something, like she was trying to solve the world's problems. Tell me about her, Eleanor said. She was preparing more chamomile tea, her movements economical and precise. Cole was quiet for a moment, organizing memories that still hurt to touch. Sarah was steady. That's the best word for her. I met her in Denver 3 years ago. I was working construction, trying to go straight after some years I'm not proud of. She worked in a boarding house, cooking and cleaning. We got to talking, and she never once asked me about my past. She just accepted who I was trying to become. She sounds wise. She was. Smarter than me by half, though she'd never say it. Cole smiled, the expression sad but genuine. When I got the job offer from Grant Hollis, she didn't want me to take it. Said something about him didn't sit right with her. I should have listened. You couldn't have known. Maybe. But she did somehow. Women's intuition, she called it. Said she could tell a bad man by his eyes, the way he looked at people like they were tools instead of human beings. Cole looked at Eleanor. I think she would have liked you. You've got that same steel underneath, that same way of seeing through to what matters. Eleanor's hands paused briefly in their work. I'm not trying to replace her, you know. What I'm doing for Thomas... I know, Cole interrupted gently. You're keeping him alive. That's not the same as being his mother. Sarah was his mother, and she always will be, but... He struggled for the right words. Maybe you're something else. Something he needs right now. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared purpose rather than shared history. Outside, the afternoon shadows lengthened. Deputy Warren arrived as promised, taking up position outside the shop with the bored expression of a man assigned to boring duty. Evening brought another visitor, the shopkeeper Cole had seen yesterday, the one who'd closed his door rather than help. He stood outside looking uncomfortable until Eleanor finally went to see what he wanted. "Name's Jacob Miller," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I own the dry goods store across the way. I wanted to... That is, my wife wanted me to." He cleared his throat. "We were wrong yesterday, turning you away like that with the baby dying and all. It wasn't Christian, and it wasn't right." Eleanor waited, her expression neutral. "Anyway," Miller continued, "we want to help now, if you'll let us. My wife's got milk coming in for our youngest. She says she can spare some, help with the feeding if you need a rest. And I've got credit at the store for whatever supplies you might need." "Why the change of heart?" Eleanor asked. Miller finally looked at her directly. "Because Sarah Patterson came by today, told us what she saw. A man holding his baby like the child was the only thing in the world that mattered, and I got to thinking about how I'd feel if it was my boy dying and nobody would help. I'd want someone to show mercy. So that's what we're offering now if it's not too late." Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "It's not too late. Tell your wife we appreciate the offer, and we'll let you know if we need it." After Miller left, Eleanor returned to find Cole watching her with something like wonder. "What?" she asked. "You were right. About people, about giving them a chance to be better than their fear." He shook his head. "I'm not used to that. Being wrong in a good way. Get used to it," Eleanor said dryly. "I have a feeling there's a lot you're not used to that you'll need to learn." That night, with Deputy Warren standing guard outside and Thomas sleeping peacefully nearby, Cole and Eleanor sat at the small table sharing a simple dinner of stew Eleanor had made. The domesticity of it felt strange to Cole. He couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal in safety without looking over his shoulder or planning his next move. "Tell me about Elizabeth," he said quietly, "if you want to." Eleanor was silent for so long Cole thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. "She was perfect. 6 pounds, dark hair like mine, these serious gray eyes that seemed to see everything. The pregnancy was difficult. I wasn't married, and the father..." She paused, some old pain flickering across her face. "He was a doctor, passing through town. He made promises he had no intention of keeping. When I told him about the baby, he left the next day." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm not." Eleanor's voice was firm. "Elizabeth was mine, just mine, and that was enough. I had a good pregnancy, a healthy birth, 6 beautiful months of watching her grow, and then winter came, and the pneumonia, and nothing I did made any difference. All my knowledge, all my medicines, and I couldn't save my own child." Cole heard the weight of that failure in her voice, understood it in a way only someone who'd lost could. "It wasn't your fault. I know that in my head. My heart's slower to accept it." Eleanor looked down at her hands, at the scars and calluses that marked years of hard work. "After she died, I thought about leaving Ashford Creek, going somewhere nobody knew me, where I wouldn't have to see the pity in people's eyes or hear them whisper about the woman who had a bastard child and couldn't even keep it alive. But I stayed. This is my home, my business. I refuse to let grief or shame drive me away. That takes courage. Or stubbornness. I'm not always sure which." Eleanor looked up, meeting his eyes. "What about you? What will you do if we clear your name? Where will you go?" Cole hadn't let himself think that far ahead. "I don't know. Somewhere Thomas can grow up safe, I suppose. Somewhere I can make an honest living, give him a decent life." "Alone?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to examine. Cole thought about Sarah, about the life they'd planned together that had been cut so brutally short. Thought about Eleanor, this fierce, complicated woman who'd saved his son and asked nothing in return. Thought about the strange sense of rightness he felt sitting here in this small room, like pieces of a broken thing finding their way back together. "I don't know," he said again, more honestly. "I haven't been anything but alone for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else." "Well," Eleanor said, standing to clear the dishes, "you're not alone right now, so maybe start there and see where it leads." The moment was interrupted by a commotion outside, raised voices, the sound of running feet. Cole was at the window instantly, his hand on his gun. Deputy Warren had moved away from his post, was heading toward a group of men gathering near the saloon. Even from a distance, Cole could read the body language: anger, aggression, the ugly energy of mob thinking. "Get away from the window," Eleanor said sharply, moving to stand beside him. "And keep your hand off that gun. We're not giving them an excuse." They watched as Sheriff Yates appeared, moving to intercept the group. The conversation was heated but too far away to hear clearly. The sheriff stood his ground, his stance radiating authority even at this distance. Several times, men from the group gestured toward Eleanor's shop, their meaning clear. "They want you," Eleanor said quietly. "They're trying to convince Yates to hand you over, or at least run you out of town. Maybe I should go, before this gets worse." "And take Thomas where?" "Into the night, with no milk, no shelter." Eleanor's voice was steel. "No. We stand our ground. Let Yates do his job." The standoff lasted nearly 20 minutes. Cole watched as one by one, the men in the group seemed to lose momentum, their anger dampened by whatever the sheriff was saying. Finally, the crowd began to disperse, men heading back to their homes or the saloon, the immediate danger passing. Yates walked back toward Eleanor's shop, his face grim but satisfied. He spoke briefly with Deputy Warren, then looked up at the window where Cole and Eleanor stood. He didn't wave or signal, just nodded once, a gesture that said handled for now, before turning away. "We can't keep living like this," Cole said, "under siege, waiting for the next confrontation." "We won't," Eleanor replied, "because tomorrow we change the dynamic. Tomorrow we stop hiding and start showing this town who you really are." "And if they don't want to see it?" Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes fierce in the lamplight. "Then we make them see it. We've got truth on our side, Cole, and a baby who needs his father. That's more powerful than any lie Grant Hollis can tell, if we're brave enough to wield it." Cole wanted to believe her, wanted to trust in the fundamental goodness of people the way she seemed to, but he'd seen too much darkness, known too many men who chose expediency over honor. Still, looking at Eleanor's determined face, at Thomas sleeping peacefully nearby, he felt something shift inside him. Not quite hope, but something adjacent to it. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could win this fight without running. "All right," he said, "tomorrow we stop hiding. But Eleanor, if things go wrong, you get yourself clear. Don't go down with me out of loyalty or stubbornness or whatever this is between us." "What's between us," Eleanor said evenly, "is a child who needs both of us alive. So we'll just have to make sure things don't go wrong." She said it with such certainty that Cole almost believed her. Almost believed that tomorrow they could walk through Ashford Creek with their heads high, that people would see past the bounty to the truth, that somehow they'd find a way to build something lasting from this fragile beginning. The night settled in around them, quiet and tense. They took turns sleeping while the other kept watch, a rhythm they were already falling into like they'd been doing it for years instead of hours. And when Thomas woke hungry in the deep hours of morning, Eleanor fed him while Cole stood guard, and the simple domesticity of it felt both strange and right. Somewhere out there, Grant Hollis was probably planning his next move. Somewhere, men were calculating whether $50 was worth the risk of defying the sheriff. Somewhere, danger was gathering like a storm on the horizon. But in that small room, lit by a single lamp turned low, 3 people who'd been broken found themselves fitting together in unexpected ways. And for tonight, that was enough. Morning came too quickly, pale light filtering through the windows and bringing with it the weight of Eleanor's plan. Cole had barely slept, his mind turning over every possible disaster that could unfold when they stepped outside. But Eleanor was already moving with quiet determination, heating water for washing, laying out clean clothes she'd somehow procured overnight. "Mrs. Patterson brought these by early this morning," she explained, holding up a simple dress and shawl. "For me to look presentable. She also left a clean shirt for you. Said her husband's about your size." Cole took the shirt, feeling the softness of fabric that had been washed with care. "People are helping us." "Some people," Eleanor corrected. "Don't mistake a few acts of kindness for universal acceptance. There are still plenty in this town who'd rather see you hang than look too closely at the truth." She was right, of course. But as Cole washed and changed, He couldn't help noting how the simple act of putting on clean clothes felt like armor, like preparation for battle. Thomas was awake and fed, his small face alert and healthy, looking nothing like the dying infant Cole had carried into town 3 days ago. 3 days. It felt like a lifetime. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked, lifting Thomas from his makeshift bed and wrapping him carefully in one of Mrs. Patterson's blankets. She'd dressed in her best, her hair pulled back neatly, her bearing composed and dignified. She looked every inch the respectable businesswoman, and Cole understood the strategy: make them see her first, see her respectability, before they focused on him. "As I'll ever be," Cole said, though his hand drifted to his gun out of habit. "Leave it," Eleanor said sharply. "The gun stays here. We're not going out there looking for a fight. Eleanor, we're a man, a woman, and a baby taking a morning walk. That's all. Anything else, and we've already lost." Her eyes were fierce, brooking no argument. "Trust me, Cole, please, He wanted to protest, wanted to keep the one thing that had kept him alive through years of hard living. But looking at her face, at the absolute certainty there, he found himself unbuckling his gun belt and setting it on the table. "If this goes wrong," he started. "Then we'll handle it together," Eleanor finished. "Now come on. The longer we wait, the harder it gets." She handed Thomas to Cole, and the weight of his son in his arms steadied something inside him. This was what mattered. Not the gun, not the fear, but this small life that depended on him to be better than he'd been, braver than he felt. They stepped outside together. The street was already busy with morning activity. Shops opening, wagons rolling past, people going about their daily business. The moment Cole appeared, everything seemed to pause. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A woman dropping off laundry froze with her basket half lifted. A man leading a horse to the blacksmith's turned to stare. The silence was deafening. Eleanor took Cole's arm, a deliberate gesture of solidarity, and began walking. Not fast, not slow, just a measured pace that said they had every right to be there. Cole forced himself to look straight ahead, though he was acutely aware of every person they passed, every window that might hide a gun, every alley that could conceal danger. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Eleanor said pleasantly, nodding to the shopkeeper who stood in his doorway. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Miller looked startled to be addressed directly, his eyes darting between Eleanor and Cole before settling on Thomas. Something in his expression softened. "Morning, Miss Hayes. I see the little one's doing better." "Much better, thanks to your wife's generosity." Eleanor's voice was warm but firm, establishing the narrative she wanted. "A few days of proper care, and he's thriving." They moved on, and Cole heard Miller call out to someone behind them, heard him say something about just a baby and doing better now. Small things, but they rippled outward through the watching crowd. Mrs. Patterson appeared from the general store, her own baby on her hip. She hesitated for just a moment, then crossed the street to meet them. "Miss Hayes," she said, loud enough to be heard by nearby onlookers, "I wanted to ask how the baby's taking to the vegetables. My son loved the carrots, but he won't touch peas to save his life." Eleanor smiled, understanding the gift being offered. "We haven't tried solids yet. He's still too young, but when the time comes, I'll keep that in mind." The two women talked for several minutes about nothing of consequence, but everything of importance, because while they spoke, people saw a normal conversation between two women about babies. Saw Cole standing patiently with Thomas, saw the picture of ordinary domesticity rather than dangerous criminality. When Mrs. Patterson finally excused herself, she touched Cole's arm briefly. "You take good care of that boy," she said quietly. "He's lucky to have a father who'd fight so hard for him." Cole's throat tightened. "Thank you, ma'am." They continued their walk, and slowly, incrementally, the town began to resume its normal rhythm. Not everyone was convinced. Cole caught hostile stares from several men, saw curtains twitch as people watched from safe distance. But others nodded greeting, or at least didn't actively glare. Progress, however small. They were halfway down the main street when a man stepped out of the saloon directly into their path. He was big, rough-looking, with the red-rimmed eyes of someone who'd been drinking since the night before. Cole recognized him from the angry group that had gathered yesterday, one of the loudest voices demanding action. "Well, well," the man said, his words slightly slurred. If it ain't the killer and his accomplice taking a stroll like they own the place. Eleanor's grip on Cole's arm tightened, a warning to stay calm. Excuse us, Mr. Dawson. We're just passing through. You're doing more than passing through. You're harboring a wanted criminal, making a mockery of decent folks trying to keep this town safe. Dawson swayed slightly, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. $50 says I could solve this problem right now. People were stopping, gathering at a safe distance but close enough to watch. Cole felt the weight of their attention, felt the situation balancing on a knife's edge. His instinct screamed at him to push Eleanor behind him, to prepare for the draw he knew was coming. But he'd promised to trust her way, and that meant standing still even when every nerve in his body demanded action. Mr. Dawson's, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the tension with unexpected authority. You're drunk, you're making a scene, and you're frightening people. I suggest you go home, sleep it off, and reconsider threatening a man holding an infant in broad daylight. I ain't threatening nobody but a killer. You're threatening a father. Eleanor stepped forward, putting herself partially between Cole and Dawson's gun. The move was insane, brave, and completely deliberate. Look at him, Mr. Dawson. Really look. Do you see a dangerous outlaw, or do you see a man trying to keep his baby alive? Dawson's eyes flicked to Thomas, and something in his expression wavered. Up close, the baby was impossible to ignore. Small, vulnerable, innocent. Cole angled Thomas slightly so the morning light caught his face, showing the healthy color, the bright eyes, the complete dependence. That baby nearly died 3 days ago, Eleanor continued, her voice softer now but no less intense. He was starving, dehydrated, hours from death. His father rode until his horse could barely stand, begging strangers for help. And when everyone in this town turned their backs, I chose mercy. I chose to save a child's life. Are you really going to shoot a man for that? In front of witnesses? In front of women and children? Is $50 worth your soul, Mr. Dawson? The silence that followed was absolute. Cole watched Dawson's face, saw the alcohol-fueled bravado warring with something deeper, something human. The man's hand remained on his gun, but his fingers had gone still. Sheriff Yates appeared then, moving through the crowd with Deputy Warren at his side. Problem here, Eleanor. No problem, Sheriff, Eleanor said calmly. Mr. Dawson was just expressing his concerns, and I was explaining why they're unfounded. Weren't you, Mr. Dawson? Dawson looked at the sheriff, at Eleanor, at Cole and Thomas. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something cutting, something that would salvage his pride. But he seemed to realize he'd lost the moment, lost it the second Eleanor made him see the baby instead of the bounty. I still think he's dangerous, Dawson muttered, but the heat had gone out of his voice. And I think you're a fool for trusting him. Then I'm a fool, Eleanor said simply. But I'm a fool who saved a child's life, and I'll sleep just fine with that choice. Dawson turned away, shouldering past the watching crowd and disappearing into the saloon. The gathered people began to disperse, though Cole heard snatches of conversation as they went. Some supportive, some skeptical, but all of them talking, processing, reconsidering. Yates approached, keeping his voice low. That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen, Eleanor. Probably both, she admitted. But it worked, didn't it? The sheriff looked at Cole, his expression unreadable. You let her stand between you and a drawn gun. She didn't give me much choice, Cole said, and she was right. Fighting would have proved I was everything they feared. This way, you proved you're willing to take a risk for peace. Yates nodded slowly. All right. Keep walking, but don't push your luck. And Cole, next time someone goes for a gun around that baby, you get him clear first. Pride's not worth his life. Yes, sir, Cole said, meaning it. They continued their walk, and though the tension remained, it felt different now. Less hostile, more uncertain. People weren't sure what to make of them, which was progress from being sure they were dangerous. Eleanor led them to the small church at the end of the main street, a white building with a simple steeple. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, Cole following. The interior was cool and dim, empty except for rows of plain wooden pews and morning light streaming through simple windows. I'm not much for religion, Eleanor said quietly, moving to sit in one of the back pews. But sometimes I come here to think. It's peaceful. Cole sat beside her, adjusting Thomas in his arms. The baby was getting fussy, making small sounds that would soon become demands for food. We should head back. He'll need to eat soon. In a minute, Eleanor was quiet, staring at the simple altar at the front of the church. My daughter's buried in the cemetery behind this building. I come to talk to her sometimes, tell her about my day. It probably seems foolish. It's not foolish, Cole said. Sarah's buried 300 miles from here, in a place I'll probably never see again. I envy you having a place to visit. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him, and Cole saw her making some kind of calculation, coming to some decision. Would you like to meet her? Elizabeth, I mean, or rather, would you mind if I introduced you? The request was so unexpected, so intimate, that Cole felt the weight of it settle over him like a mantle. This was trust, real trust, Eleanor letting him into the most private corners of her grief. I'd be honored, he said quietly. They walked around to the small cemetery where weathered headstones marked the town's dead. Eleanor led him to a newer stone, smaller than most, with a simple inscription, Elizabeth Rose Hayes, born March 15, 1875, died September 22, 1875, beloved daughter. Eleanor knelt beside the grave, her hand resting lightly on the stone. Hello, sweetheart. I brought someone to meet you. This is Mr. Mercer and his son Thomas. They needed help, and I helped them. I think you would have liked that. You always did love babies. Cole stood back, giving her space, but holding Thomas where Eleanor could see him. He watched her talk to her dead daughter with simple honesty, no pretense or performance, just a mother maintaining connection in the only way left to her. He's getting so strong, Eleanor continued, her voice soft. 3 days ago, he was dying. Now look at him. Bright eyes, good color, fighting to live. It reminds me of you, how hard you fought at the end, how brave you were. Her voice caught slightly. I wish you'd won that fight, baby girl. I wish it every day. The moment stretched out, heavy with grief but also with something else. Acceptance, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. Finally, Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Thank you, she said to Cole, for understanding why I needed to do that. You don't need to thank me, Cole said. Loss is loss. It doesn't care about propriety or schedules. They walked back toward the main street, Thomas now crying in earnest, his small face scrunched with indignation. Several people turned to look at the sound, and Cole saw something shift in their expressions. Recognition, perhaps, that crying babies were universal, that this was just a hungry infant, not a prop in some dangerous game. Eleanor took Thomas from Cole as they walked, rocking him gently. Almost home, little one. Just a bit farther. They were nearly to the apothecary when a rider came thundering into town from the east, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. The man pulled up hard in front of the sheriff's office, practically falling from his saddle in his haste to dismount. "Sheriff!" he shouted. "Sheriff Yates! You need to hear this." Yates appeared from inside, Warren close behind. "Calm down, Henderson. What's going on?" "Grant Hollis," the rider gasped, still catching his breath. "He's coming. Left Wyoming Territory 3 days ago with 5 men, all armed. They're asking about Cole Mercer at every town between here and there." Cole felt ice flood his veins. 3 days ago. That would have been right after word reached Wyoming that he'd been spotted in Ashford Creek. Grant hadn't trusted bounty hunters to do the job. He was coming himself, with enough men to ensure there'd be no escape. "How far out?" Yates demanded. "Half a day, maybe less. They're riding hard, not stopping except to ask questions." Henderson finally seemed to register Cole standing there with Eleanor. "That him? That's the man they're hunting?" "Get inside," Eleanor said quietly to Cole, already moving toward her shop. "Now." But Cole stood frozen, his mind racing through calculations. 6 men, all loyal to Grant, all willing to kill. Even if Yates tried to protect him, there'd be bloodshed. People would die. Maybe Eleanor. Maybe even Thomas, if they were caught in crossfire. "I should leave," Cole said. "Draw them away from town." "With what?" Eleanor hissed. "No horse, no supplies, no gun? You'd make it maybe 10 miles before they ran you down. Better than them coming here." "No." Eleanor's voice was absolute. "We didn't come this far to give up now. We'll figure something out." Yates was already organizing, sending Warren to gather anyone in town who could shoot, posting lookouts on the roads. Cole watched the preparations with the sick certainty of someone who'd seen this before, who knew how it would end. They made it inside the shop, and Eleanor immediately went to feed Thomas, but her hands were shaking for the first time since Cole had met her. The baby sensed her tension and fussed, struggling to latch on. "Easy," Cole said, putting his hand on her shoulder. "He needs you calm." "Calm," Eleanor laughed, the sound brittle. 6 armed men are coming to kill you, possibly destroy my business and my life in the process, and you want me calm? "I want you thinking," Cole said, "because you're the smartest person in this room, and if there's a way out of this, you'll find it." Eleanor took a deep breath, then another, forcing her hands steady until Thomas could nurse properly. Once he was settled, she looked up at Cole with eyes gone sharp and calculating. "The ledgers," she said. "You mentioned Marcus Hollis kept detailed records of Grant's embezzlement. If those still exist, if we could find them—" "They're in Wyoming, probably locked in Grant's safe. We don't have time to get them. But we have time to make Grant think we already have them." Eleanor's voice was gaining strength, conviction. "What if we let it slip that you came to Ashford Creek because you'd hidden the ledgers here before you ran? That you were planning to use them to clear your name?" Cole saw where she was going. Make him think the evidence is here, somewhere he can't just shoot his way to it. Make him have to negotiate. Or at least make him hesitate long enough for us to figure out our next move. Eleanor shifted Thomas to her other side. "We'd need to be convincing. Make people believe the story so it gets back to Grant before he reaches town. It's risky. If he thinks the ledgers are real but doesn't believe we actually have them, it won't stop him from killing me to silence me permanently. Do you have a better idea?" Cole didn't. Every scenario he could imagine ended with bloodshed or running, and he was done with both. "All right, let's say we plant the story. Who do we tell?" "Everyone," Eleanor said simply. "We make it loud, public, impossible to ignore. We make it such common knowledge that Grant can't just shoot you without the whole town knowing why." They spent the next hour crafting their story, making it believable enough to spread but vague enough to be hard to disprove. Then Eleanor went to Mrs. Patterson, told her in confidence, knowing it wouldn't stay confidential, that Cole had been holding back one crucial detail. That before he'd run, he'd stolen the evidence of Grant's crimes and hidden it somewhere safe. That he'd come to Ashford Creek specifically because it was far enough from Wyoming to buy time to figure out how to use what he'd found. Mrs. Patterson's eyes had gone wide. "You mean he can prove his innocence?" "If he can get the evidence to the right authorities," Eleanor had said. "But Grant knows he has it. That's why he's coming. Not for justice, but to destroy the one thing that can expose him." The story spread like wildfire through a dry forest. By noon, half the town was talking about the mysterious ledgers. By early afternoon, merchants were debating what they contained. By evening, when the lookout spotted riders approaching from the east, everyone in Ashford Creek knew that Cole Mercer had something Grant Hollis desperately wanted to keep hidden. Sheriff Yates had positioned men at key points throughout town, but he'd been clear with Cole. "I'll try to keep this from turning into a bloodbath. But if Grant starts shooting, my first duty is to protect the people of this town, not you. You understand?" "I understand," Cole had said, "and I appreciate you trying at all." Now standing at Eleanor's window with his recovered gun belt strapped on despite her protests, Cole watched the riders enter town. 6 men on tired horses, their faces hard with days of travel and harder with purpose. And in the lead, Grant Hollis himself, lean, cold-eyed, dressed in black like he was attending a funeral. Maybe his own. Grant pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, his men spreading out behind him in a formation that was clearly rehearsed. Yates came out to meet them, his own deputies flanking him, and even from a distance, Cole could see the calculation in both men's eyes. "Can't hear them," Eleanor said, standing beside him with Thomas asleep against her shoulder. "What do you think they're saying?" "Grant's demanding I be turned over. Yates is probably explaining that without a warrant, he's got no authority to do that." Cole watched the body language, the subtle shifts. Grant's bringing up the bounty, maybe threatening to claim it by force. Yates is reminding him that 6 armed men shooting up a town is a good way to get hanged, legally or otherwise. The confrontation continued for several minutes before Grant finally dismounted, his movements deliberate and controlled. He said something to his men, and they relaxed slightly but didn't stand down. Grant and Yates disappeared into the sheriff's office together. "That can't be good," Eleanor murmured. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Cole positioned himself where he could see without being easily shot, his hand on his gun. Eleanor opened the door to find Deputy Warren standing there, looking uncomfortable. "Sheriff wants to see you both," he said. "Says it's important. Says to bring the baby." "Is this an arrest?" Eleanor asked sharply. "No, ma'am. It's, well, I guess it's a negotiation. Grant Hollis wants to talk." Eleanor looked at Cole, questions in her eyes. He nodded slowly. This was what they'd been maneuvering toward, forcing Grant to talk instead of shoot. But walking into that room would be like walking into a den of wolves, and they all knew it. "We're coming," Cole said, "but we're coming armed, and if Grant or any of his men make a move toward violence, all bets are off." Warren nodded. "Sheriff figured you'd say that. He's got the same message for Grant." They walked to the sheriff's office, a small procession that drew stares from every window and doorway. Inside, Grant Hollis stood by Yates's desk, his cold eyes fixing on Cole the moment he entered. "Well," Grant said, his voice smooth as oil and twice as slick. "Here's the man who murdered my brother. Nice to finally catch up with you, Cole." "I didn't kill Marcus," Cole said evenly. "You did, or had it done, and we both know why." Grant's smile was a razor blade. "Is that the story you're telling? That I killed my own brother? That's a serious accusation to make without proof." "I have proof," Cole said, the lie coming easily because they'd rehearsed it. "Marcus's ledgers, every transaction, every theft, every dollar you skimmed from his business over 5 years. He was going to turn you in, so you silenced him and blamed me." Something flickered behind Grant's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "If you had proof, you'd have used it already. You'd have gone to the law instead of running." "The law in Wyoming is your law," Cole said. "I needed time to get the ledgers somewhere safe, somewhere you couldn't reach them or destroy them. That's why I came here." "And where are these mythical ledgers now?" Cole smiled, cold and hard. "Safe. And they'll stay that way unless something happens to me. You kill me, Grant, and those ledgers go straight to the territorial governor with a full explanation of what they prove. You'll hang for murder and theft both." The silence in the room was absolute. Grant stared at Cole, clearly trying to determine if he was bluffing. Cole stared back, letting every ounce of his hatred for this man show on his face, betting that Grant would read it as confidence rather than desperation. "I want those ledgers," Grant said finally. "I want my name cleared and a written confession that you killed your brother. I think we're both going to be disappointed." Grant's jaw tightened. He looked at Eleanor, at Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms, and something ugly crossed his face. "That's a pretty baby. Be a shame if something happened to him while you're playing these games." Cole had his gun half drawn before Yates's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough!" The sheriff stepped between them. "Grant, you just threatened a child in my office in front of witnesses. Give me one reason not to lock you up right now." "Because you've got no authority over me," Grant said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. He'd overplayed his hand, let his anger show his true nature. "I came here for a fugitive, and I'm not leaving without him." "You came here for revenge," Eleanor said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "You came here because Cole knows what you did, because he can prove it, and because you can't let him live long enough to expose you. But here's what you didn't count on. We're not afraid of you, Mr. Hollis. We're not going to be bullied or threatened into giving you what you want." "You should be afraid," Grant said softly. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." "I have every idea," Cole said. "I watched you run roughshod over good people for 2 years. I saw you destroy anyone who stood in your way. I know exactly what you are, Grant. That's why I made sure that if anything happens to me, those ledgers will destroy you even in death." It was a standoff with no clear winner, and everyone in the room knew it. Grant couldn't kill Cole without risking the ledgers being exposed. Cole couldn't prove anything without producing ledgers that didn't exist. They were locked in a stalemate, both desperate, both dangerous. Finally, Grant stepped back, his face a mask of cold fury. You've got 1 week to produce those ledgers and prove they say what you claim. If you can't, or if you try to run, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth and kill everyone who helped you along the way, starting with her. He nodded toward Eleanor. And if I do produce them? Cole asked. Then we'll let the law sort it out. If the ledgers prove what you say, I'll face justice. But if they don't, or if they turn out to be forgeries, Grant smiled, cold and terrible. Then you'll face mine. He left without another word, his men following. Through the window, Cole watched them ride to the saloon, clearly planning to wait in town, to make sure he didn't run. 1 week, Yates said heavily. You bought yourself 1 week, Cole. Now what the hell are you going to do with it? Cole looked at Eleanor, saw his own desperation reflected in her eyes. They'd gained time, but time for what? The ledgers didn't exist. They had no proof, no evidence, nothing but a bluff that would collapse the moment Grant called it. I don't know, Cole admitted. But we'll figure something out. We have to. Outside, the sun was setting over Ashford Creek, painting everything in shades of orange and gold, beautiful and terrible, like a world on fire. And somewhere in that dying light, answers waited. If only they could find them before time ran out. Eleanor closed the door behind them, her hands trembling as she set Thomas down in his drawer bed. The baby stirred but didn't wake, exhausted from a day of being carried through tension and confrontation. Cole stood at the window, watching the saloon where Grant and his men had taken rooms, watching for any sign of movement that might signal danger. 1 week, Eleanor said quietly. 7 days to produce evidence that doesn't exist. We're not going to make it, are we? Cole wanted to lie, wanted to offer false comfort, but she deserved better than that. Not unless we find another way. The ledgers were real. Marcus did keep detailed records, but they're either in Grant's possession now or destroyed. Without them, it's his word against mine, and his word comes with money and power behind it. Eleanor sank into her chair, the weight of their situation finally showing in the slump of her shoulders. I thought we were being clever. I thought buying time would help, but all we've done is put a clock on our own execution. You did the only thing you could, Cole said, turning from the window. Without that bluff, Grant would have killed me in the street and burned your shop to the ground looking for ledgers he thought were hidden here. At least this way, we have a chance. A chance at what? We can't forge the documents. Grant would spot them as fake immediately. We can't run. He'll hunt us down. We can't fight. 6 armed men against what? You and Sheriff Yates? Those aren't odds, Cole. That's suicide. She was right, and they both knew it. Cole crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair, looking up into her exhausted face. Then we find the real ledgers. Or we find someone who knows what was in them. Or we find another crime of Grant's we can prove. There has to be something, some weakness we can exploit. In 7 days? When we're trapped in this town being watched every minute? Eleanor shook her head. I'm trying to think, trying to see a path forward, but I can't. All I see is that baby growing up without a father, and you dying because I convinced you to trust in the goodness of people who are too scared to stand up to Grant Hollis. Cole took her hand, feeling the calluses and scars, the evidence of years spent fighting to survive alone. You saved my son's life. Whatever happens now, that matters more than anything else. Thomas is alive because of you, and if I die protecting him, I'll die knowing he's in good hands. Don't, Eleanor said sharply, pulling her hand away. Don't make peace with dying when we're not dead yet. Don't you dare give up. The fierce intensity in her voice startled him. This wasn't the calm, practical Eleanor who'd fed his son and faced down angry crowds. This was someone raw and desperate, someone who'd already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose again. I'm not giving up, Cole said softly. But I'm also not going to let Thomas or you pay the price for my mistakes. If it comes down to it, it won't. Eleanor stood abruptly, pacing the small room with restless energy. We're missing something. There has to be something we're not seeing. Grant is nervous, or he wouldn't have come all this way personally. Men like him don't leave their territory unless they're truly threatened. He's threatened because he thinks I have the ledgers. But why does he believe it? We just made up that story today, and yet he accepted it almost immediately. Why? Eleanor stopped pacing, her eyes sharpening with thought. Unless Unless he already suspected you might have taken something. Unless there's a reason he'd believe you'd risk going back for evidence. Cole thought back to that night, to delivering papers to Marcus in his office. He'd been alone with the man for maybe 10 minutes while Marcus signed documents and made small talk. And then, the safe, Cole said slowly. Marcus's safe was open when I was there. He was pulling papers from it, putting others back. I remember noticing because it was unusual. Marcus was paranoid about security, never left the safe open when anyone else was around. Did you see what was inside? Ledgers, stacks of them, all bound in red leather. Marcus made some comment about them being his insurance policy, said that honest books were the best defense against dishonest partners. Cole's pulse quickened. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but if Marcus mentioned that to me, maybe he mentioned it to others. Maybe Grant thinks I saw something specific, something incriminating. Eleanor's eyes were bright now, the despair giving way to calculation. So Grant already had reason to believe you might know about the ledgers even before we planted the story. That's why he bought it so quickly. It confirmed his existing fears rather than creating new ones. Which means someone else might know about them too, someone Marcus trusted enough to tell. Cole started pacing now, his mind working through possibilities. Marcus had a clerk, a young man named Peter Dunn, quiet, careful, the kind who noticed everything. If Marcus kept records of Grant's crimes, Peter might have seen them. Where is he now? Last I heard, still in Wyoming. Grant kept him on after Marcus died, probably to keep him close and quiet. Cole met Eleanor's eyes. But if we could get a message to him, if we could convince him to tell what he knows, Grant's watching us. Any message we send will be intercepted. They fell silent, the brief spark of hope fading under the weight of practical obstacles. Outside, darkness had fully settled over Ashford Creek. Cole could see lamplight in the saloon windows, could imagine Grant and his men drinking and planning, confident that their quarry was trapped. A knock at the back door made them both freeze. Cole's hand went to his gun as Eleanor moved cautiously toward the sound. She cracked the door open, then relaxed. Mrs. Patterson, what are you doing here? The young woman slipped inside quickly, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I can't stay long. My husband thinks I'm visiting my sister, but I heard what happened at the sheriff's office. Heard about Mr. Hollis's threats. She looked at Cole, her expression earnest. You can't let him win. That man is poison. My cousin worked for him up in Wyoming. He drove her family off their land when they couldn't pay debts they didn't owe. She died of fever that winter with nowhere to go. I'm sorry, Cole said, but I'm not sure what we can do to stop him. Maybe I can help. My husband used to work for the freight company back when Marcus Hollis ran it. He left after Marcus died because he said Grant was running it into the ground with theft and corner cutting. Mrs. Patterson reached into her apron and pulled out a folded letter. He kept this. Didn't think much of it at the time, but after hearing your story, I thought maybe it might matter. Eleanor took the letter, unfolding it carefully. It was dated 6 months before Marcus's death, written in a careful hand. She read aloud. Dear Mr. Patterson, I'm writing to inform you of certain irregularities I've discovered in the company accounts. Shipments that never arrived, payments to suppliers who don't exist, money disappearing into what appears to be a second set of books. I'm still investigating, but I wanted trusted employees to be aware in case something happens to me. If I'm right about what I suspect, my brother has been embezzling from the company for years. I'm gathering proof, and when I have enough, I'll take it to the authorities. Until then, please keep this information confidential. Marcus Hollis. The room was absolutely silent when Eleanor finished reading. Cole felt something shift inside his chest, felt the first real hope he'd experienced since this nightmare began. He knew, Cole breathed. Marcus knew, and he was building a case against Grant. That's why Grant killed him, not in sudden anger, but to stop him from exposing the theft. And this proves you're telling the truth about Grant having motive, Eleanor said, her voice quickening with excitement. It's not the ledgers, but it's something. It's proof that Marcus suspected his brother, proof that there was conflict between them. It's not enough to convict Grant of murder, Cole said, forcing himself to think clearly. But it might be enough to cast doubt, to make people question the bounty. Mrs. Patterson was watching them with worried eyes. Will it help? Really help? It's a start. Eleanor said firmly. It's more than we had an hour ago. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you for trusting us with this. After the woman left, Cole and Eleanor spread the letter on the table, reading it over and over, looking for anything they might have missed. The implications were clear. Marcus had suspected embezzlement, had been gathering evidence, had warned trusted employees. It painted a picture of a man preparing to expose corruption, a man who died before he could. We need to get this to Sheriff Yates, Cole said. Let him see that there's more to this story than Grant's version. Tomorrow, Eleanor agreed. First thing. And we need to think about who else might have letters like this. Who else Marcus might have warned. They worked late into the night, Cole writing down names of people who'd worked for the freight company, Eleanor organizing what they knew into a coherent narrative. Thomas woke twice to nurse, and each time Eleanor tended to him while Cole kept writing, the scratch of the pen a small sound of defiance against the darkness outside. Finally, exhausted, they tried to sleep. Cole took his usual position by the stove, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept turning over possibilities, trying to find a path through the maze they were trapped in. He was still awake when Eleanor spoke from her bed. Cole, are you sleeping? No, you? Can't. A pause, then, tell me about something good. About Sarah, about a time when things were simple. Cole thought back, reaching for memories that didn't hurt. There was this day, maybe a year after we met. We'd saved up enough for a picnic, went out to a meadow outside Denver. Sarah brought this terrible pie she'd made, burned the crust black, filling was half raw, but she was so proud of it, so determined we were going to enjoy this perfect day. He smiled in the darkness. I ate 3 pieces of that horrible pie and told her it was delicious. She knew I was lying, but she appreciated the effort. What happened to the rest of it? We fed it to some very confused squirrels. Sarah laughed until she cried, watching them try to figure out if it was food or a weapon. The memory was bittersweet but good. She had this laugh, like music, like everything wrong in the world didn't matter when she was happy. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She sounds wonderful. She was, and she would have liked you, I think. You've got that same strength she had, that same refusal to let the world break you. I feel pretty broken right now, Eleanor admitted quietly. You're not. Bent, maybe, tested, but not broken. Cole sat up, looking toward where she lay in the shadows. You stood between me and a drawn gun today. You've risked everything you have for a stranger and his child. That's not broken, Eleanor. That's the strongest thing I've ever seen. Or the most foolish. Maybe both, Cole smiled. Sarah used to say that the line between brave and stupid was so thin you couldn't see it until after everything was over. I think she'd say we're walking that line right now. And which side do you think we'll land on? I don't know yet. Ask me when this is over. They fell quiet again, but the silence was companionable now, less heavy. Cole must have dozed eventually because he jerked awake to Thomas crying and pale dawn light filtering through the windows. Eleanor was already up, tending to the baby, her hair loose around her shoulders and her face soft with the kind of tenderness that came from caring for something helpless. She looked up and caught him watching, and something passed between them, recognition, maybe, or understanding. They were in this together now, bound by something deeper than convenience or necessity. Whatever happened, they'd face it as a unit. Good morning, she said quietly, so as not to disturb Thomas. Ready to change the world? Ready to try, Cole said, standing and stretching muscles stiff from another night on the floor. Let's go see the sheriff. They found Yates in his office early, already working through paperwork. He looked up when they entered, his expression weary but alert. Please tell me you have good news, he said, because Grant's already been by this morning, making noise about moving up the deadline. We have this. Eleanor placed the letter on his desk. Read it. Yates read slowly, his expression growing more thoughtful with each line. When he finished, he sat back, rubbing his jaw. This is interesting. Changes the narrative significantly. It proves Grant had motive to kill his brother, Cole said. It proves there was conflict, that Marcus suspected embezzlement, that he was gathering evidence. It proves he suspected, Yates corrected. It doesn't prove Grant actually did anything, and it definitely doesn't prove he committed murder. But he tapped the letter thoughtfully. It does raise reasonable doubt about his version of events. And if we can find more letters like this, more people, Marcus warned, we might be able to build a pattern. How do we do that with Grant watching our every move? Eleanor asked. Yates was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he stood, moving to the window to look out at the street. I've been sheriff in this territory for 15 years, worked with territorial authorities, federal marshals, judges who actually care about justice. I know people, and I know how to get messages where they need to go without them being intercepted. He turned back to face them, and Cole saw determination hardening in those tired eyes. Give me 3 days. I'll send telegrams to Wyoming, reach out to contacts in the freight business, see if anyone else received letters like this. If Marcus was building a case, he would have documented it carefully. There might be copies of those ledgers somewhere safe, or at least records of what they contained. Grant gave us 7 days, Cole said. If we use 3 trying to find evidence, then you'll have 4 days to produce it or face the consequences. I know, but it's the best option we have. Yates's voice was firm. And Cole, I'm not doing this just for you. I'm doing it because I'm tired of men like Grant Hollis using fear and money to corrupt justice. If there's a chance to bring him down legally, I'm going to take it. Thank you, Sheriff, Eleanor said. You don't know what this means. I know exactly what it means. It means I'm betting my reputation and possibly my life that you two are telling the truth. He looked at them both seriously. Don't make me regret it. They left the sheriff's office with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The town was waking up around them, people starting their daily routines. Cole noticed more nods of acknowledgement than he'd seen before, fewer hostile stares. The story of the confrontation with Grant had spread, and apparently not everyone was on the rich man's side. Mrs. Miller stopped them outside her husband's store, her arms full of packages. Miss Hayes, I wanted you to know, several of us have been talking about Mr. Hollis and his threats. If it comes to trouble, you won't be alone. Not everyone in this town is willing to let bullies have their way. That's good to hear, Eleanor said carefully, but I hope it doesn't come to that. So do I. But if it does, Mrs. Miller glanced at Cole, then back to Eleanor. Just know you have friends, more than you might think. They continued to the apothecary, and Cole felt the shift in atmosphere. Not everyone was convinced, but enough people were questioning Grant's story to make a difference. The town was dividing itself, choosing sides, and for once, Cole and Eleanor weren't automatically on the losing one. Inside, Eleanor prepared breakfast while Cole tended to Thomas. The baby was thriving now, his small body filling out, his cries strong and demanding. It was hard to believe this was the same dying infant he'd carried into town less than a week ago. What happens if we win? Cole asked suddenly, watching Thomas grip his finger with tiny, determined hands. If Yates finds proof, if Grant is arrested, if I'm cleared, what then? Eleanor paused in her work, her back to him. Then you're free to go wherever you want. Make that new life you talked about. Is that what you want, for me to leave? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to voice until now. Eleanor turned slowly, her expression guarded. What I want doesn't matter. You have to do what's best for Thomas, and that might not be staying in a small town where everyone will always remember you as the man who brought trouble to their doorstep. That's not an answer, Cole pressed gently. I'm asking what you want, Eleanor. Not what's practical, not what makes sense. What do you want? She met his eyes, and for a moment the careful control she maintained slipped enough for him to see the truth underneath. Loneliness, longing, the desperate hope of someone who'd convinced herself she didn't deserve companionship. I want, she started, then stopped, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. We have to survive the next week before we can worry about what comes after. It matters to me. Cole stood, still holding Thomas, and moved closer to her. These past days with you, watching you care for my son, working together to stay alive, it's shown me something I didn't think I'd ever feel again. The possibility of not being alone, of having a partner, not just in survival, but in life. Cole, I'm not asking for promises. I'm not trying to replace Sarah or pretend what we have is the same as what I had with her. But I am saying that if we make it through this, I'd like to stay. Here in Ashford Creek, with you. If you'll have us. Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what it would mean to tie yourself to a woman with my reputation, my history. I know exactly what I'm saying, and your reputation doesn't scare me half as much as the thought of raising Thomas alone does. He needs more than just a father. He needs... Cole struggled for words. He needs what you've already given him: care, tenderness, the kind of fierce protection that comes from knowing what loss feels like. He needs a mother, Eleanor said quietly. And I buried my daughter 8 months ago. I don't know if I can be that for him without destroying myself with grief every time I look at him. Then don't be his mother. Be yourself. Be Eleanor Hayes, the woman who saved his life and stood up to angry crowds and faced down killers with nothing but words and will. That's more than enough. Thomas chose that moment to start fussing, breaking the intensity of the moment. Eleanor reached for him instinctively, and Cole let her take him, watched her settle the baby against her shoulder with practiced ease. "We'll talk about this after," she said finally. "When we know if there's going to be an after. Right now, we need to focus on surviving." "Fair enough." Cole moved back, giving her space. "But Eleanor, I meant what I said. All of it." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned her attention to Thomas. But Cole saw the way her hands trembled slightly, saw the tear that escaped before she could stop it, and knew that whatever happened in the next week, they'd already crossed a line there was no coming back from. The days that followed were tense but strangely productive. Sheriff Yates worked his contacts, sending telegrams and making inquiries. Cole and Eleanor maintained their visibility in town, refusing to hide or act guilty. And slowly, gradually, more people came forward with stories about Grant Hollis, debts called in early, land seized on technicalities, workers cheated out of wages. None of it was proof of murder, but it painted a picture of a man capable of it, a man who put money above morality and saw people as obstacles to be removed. And each story that emerged made the townspeople more willing to believe that maybe, just maybe, Cole was telling the truth. On the fourth day, a telegram arrived from Wyoming. Yates called Cole and Eleanor to his office, his expression carefully neutral. "I heard from a federal marshal I know, a man named Coleman, who's been investigating Grant Hollis for other reasons. He's very interested in this Marcus Hollis situation." Yates handed Cole the telegram. "He wants to interview you, get your full statement, hear everything you know about Grant's business practices." Cole read the message, his heart pounding. "When?" "He's traveling now, should be here in 3 days, which means..." Yates looked at them seriously. "We need to keep Grant from doing anything stupid until Coleman arrives. Once a federal marshal is involved, this becomes bigger than a local bounty. It becomes an official investigation." "Grant won't wait 3 more days," Eleanor said. "The deadline is in 3 days. He'll demand the ledgers, and when we can't produce them, then we convince him we can," Cole said, an idea forming. "We tell him the ledgers are in a bank vault in Denver, that I need time to arrange their transport. Buy another few days, just enough for Marshal Coleman to arrive." "That's risky," Yates warned. "If Grant suspects you're stalling..." "He already suspects everything," Cole interrupted. "But he's also greedy. If there's even a chance those ledgers exist, he'll want to see them destroyed before federal authorities get involved. He'll give us the time." It was a desperate plan, but desperate was all they had. That evening, Cole sent word through Deputy Warren that he wanted to meet with Grant. The message was simple. The ledgers were secured, arrangements were being made. He needed a few more days to get them transported safely. Grant's response came an hour later. He'd give Cole 3 more days, but not 1 hour longer. And if the ledgers didn't appear by then, or if they showed any sign of forgery, he'd kill Cole himself and let the town burn for harboring him. 3 days, Eleanor said that night, standing at the window and watching the saloon where Grant waited like a spider in its web. "Do you think Marshal Coleman will make it in time?" "He has to," Cole said, "because the alternative was unthinkable. Because I'm out of plans, out of tricks, and out of time. Either Coleman arrives with enough authority to arrest Grant, or we're all dead." Thomas made a small sound in his sleep, and they both turned to look at him. In the lamplight, the baby's face was peaceful, innocent, completely unaware of the danger surrounding him. He'd grown so much in just over a week, gone from dying to thriving, from helpless to demanding. He had his whole life ahead of him, full of possibility and promise. Cole was determined to make sure he got to live it, even if he didn't survive to see it himself. And looking at Eleanor's face, seeing the same fierce determination there, he knew she felt the same way. They'd come too far, fought too hard to give up now. Whatever the next 3 days brought, they'd face it together. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to win. The morning of the 6th day dawned cold and clear, the kind of autumn day that made everything seem sharper, more defined. Cole stood at the window watching the eastern road, willing a rider to appear with news that Marshal Coleman was close. But the road remained empty except for a farmer's wagon heading to market, oblivious to the tension gripping Ashford Creek. Behind him, Eleanor was feeding Thomas, her movements calm despite the worry in her eyes. They'd barely slept, taking turns keeping watch, jumping at every sound from the street below. Grant's deadline was tomorrow at noon, and Coleman still hadn't arrived. "Maybe we should run," Eleanor said quietly. "Take Thomas and leave before dawn tomorrow. Head north, lose ourselves in the territories where Grant can't follow." "He'd follow," Cole said without turning from the window. "And we'd spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, Thomas growing up never knowing safety or stability. That's not a life. That's just a slower kind of dying." "Better than the fast kind," Eleanor replied, but there was no conviction in her voice. She knew as well as he did that running would solve nothing. A knock at the door made them both tense. Cole moved to answer it, his hand instinctively checking his gun before he remembered Eleanor's rule about not answering armed. He opened the door to find Sheriff Yates standing there, his expression grim. "We need to talk," the sheriff said. "All of us. My office now." They followed him through streets that seemed unusually quiet, as if the whole town was holding its breath. In the sheriff's office, they found Deputy Warren and 2 men Cole didn't recognize. One older, distinguished-looking in a dark suit, the other younger, wearing a marshal's badge that caught the morning light. "Cole Mercer, Eleanor Hayes," Yates said formally. "This is Federal Marshal Thomas Coleman and his associate, Mr. Benjamin Cross, from the Territorial Governor's office." Cole felt hope surge in his chest. They'd made it. Coleman was here, and he'd brought official authority with him. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Coleman was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and the steady eyes of someone who'd spent decades sorting truth from lies. He studied Cole with an expression that gave nothing away. "Mr. Mercer," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I've been investigating Grant Hollis for 6 months now, following a trail of financial irregularities, intimidation, and suspected fraud. When Sheriff Yates contacted me about your situation, it aligned with patterns I'd been seeing. So I'm here to ask you directly, what do you know about Marcus Hollis's death and the alleged embezzlement?" Cole told him everything: the job with Grant, the delivery to Marcus, the open safe and the red leather ledgers, Marcus's comment about insurance policies. He described finding out about the murder the next day, Grant's immediate accusation, the way the local law had been too quick to issue a warrant. He talked about Sarah's death, about running with Thomas, about the desperate ride to Ashford Creek. Coleman listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather book. When Cole finished, the marshal turned to Mr. Cross. "What do you think?" Cross had been studying Cole throughout the entire statement. "I think his story is consistent with what we know about Grant Hollis's methods. The timeline matches. The details align with other accounts we've gathered. More importantly, his motivation makes sense. A man running from a false murder charge would do exactly what Mr. Mercer did." "The ledgers," Coleman said, focusing on Cole again. "You told Grant you have them. Do you?" "No, sir," Cole admitted. "That was a bluff to buy time. The real ledgers are either destroyed or in Grant's possession. I never actually took them." "But you saw them," Cross said. "You could testify to their existence, to what Marcus said about them being insurance against dishonest partners." "Yes, sir, though my testimony alone won't convict Grant of murder." "No," Coleman agreed, "but combined with other evidence we've gathered, it might be enough." He pulled out his own papers, spreading them on Yates's desk. "We've been investigating Grant for freight fraud, suspected bribery of territorial officials, and several instances of using violence to collect debts. We have witness statements from former employees, records of suspicious financial transactions, and now this letter from Marcus Hollis that Sheriff Yates provided. What we didn't have was a direct connection to Marcus's murder. You might be that connection. Might be isn't certainty, Eleanor said, speaking for the first time. Grant isn't going to confess just because a marshal shows up asking questions. He'll lawyer up, claim everything as false accusations from disgruntled employees and criminals trying to shift blame. You're right, Coleman said, surprising them both. Which is why we're not going to arrest him. Not yet. Cole felt the hope that had been building start to crumble. Then what are we doing? We're going to make him prove his own guilt, Cross said, a slight smile crossing his face. Mr. Mercer, when is your deadline with Grant? Tomorrow at noon. Perfect. Here's what's going to happen. Coleman leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. You're going to tell Grant that the ledgers have arrived, that they're being held at the bank for safekeeping. You're going to offer to show them to him privately, just the two of you, before they're turned over to authorities. You're going to make him believe there's still a chance he can destroy the evidence and kill you quietly. You want to use Cole as bait, Eleanor said, her voice sharp with alarm. You want him to walk into a trap with a man who's already tried to kill him. Not a trap, Coleman corrected. A controlled confrontation. We'll have deputies positioned nearby, witnesses ready to intervene if Grant makes any move toward violence. But more importantly, we'll have someone listening to every word that's said. If Grant incriminates himself, if he admits to the embezzlement, or even hints at having killed his brother, we'll have him. And if he just shoots Cole the moment they're alone? Eleanor demanded. He won't, Cross said confidently, because he'll want to see the ledgers first, want to know exactly what evidence exists against him. Grant Hollis is many things, but he's not stupid. He won't commit murder in front of potential witnesses until he's sure he has to. Cole looked at Eleanor, saw the fear in her eyes warring with understanding. This was their chance, maybe their only chance, to end this without running. But it meant walking into a room with a man who wanted him dead, betting everything on Grant's greed overriding his hatred. I'll do it, Cole said quietly. Cole, no, Eleanor started. I'll do it, he repeated more firmly, because it's the only way, and because I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of living in fear that Grant will find me someday when I'm not ready. Better to face him now, on our terms, with the law backing us up. Eleanor's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the desk, forcing them still. Then I'm coming too. If you're walking into danger, you're not doing it alone. Absolutely not, Cole said immediately. Thomas needs you. If something goes wrong, Thomas needs his father more than he needs me, Eleanor shot back. I've spent 8 months being too late to save the people I love. I'm not doing it again. If you go, I go. They stared at each other, both stubborn, both terrified, both refusing to back down. Finally, Coleman cleared his throat. Actually, having Miss Hayes present might work in our favor. Grant is less likely to try something violent with a woman in the room, especially one as respected in this community as you are, ma'am. And 2 witnesses to anything he says will be stronger than 1. It was settled then, though Cole hated every part of it. They spent the rest of the day planning, working out positions and signals, preparing for every contingency they could imagine. Coleman brought in 3 more deputies from surrounding towns, men Grant wouldn't recognize. They'd be positioned in the bank, hidden where they could hear but not be seen. That evening, Cole sent word to Grant. The ledgers had arrived. He was ready to make the exchange tomorrow at 10 in the morning at the Ashford Creek Bank. Private meeting, just Grant and himself, to verify the documents before they were turned over to authorities. Grant's response was immediate. Agreed, but he wanted Eleanor present as well. Cole's stomach turned when he read that. Grant knew Eleanor was Cole's weakness, knew threatening her was the fastest way to make him cooperate, but there was no backing out now. They spent that final night in Eleanor's apartment, neither of them pretending to sleep. Thomas was peaceful in his drawer bed, unaware that tomorrow would determine whether he grew up with a father or alone. Cole sat beside Eleanor at the small table, both of them nursing cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Tell me about what happens after, Eleanor said quietly. If we survive tomorrow, if Grant is arrested, if you're cleared, tell me what that life looks like. Cole thought about it, let himself imagine a future he'd barely dared to hope for. I'd find honest work, Maybe help Sheriff Yates or work at the mill or learn a trade. Something stable, something that lets me come home every night to Thomas. Just Thomas? He looked at her, saw the question in her eyes, the vulnerability she was finally letting him see. No, not just Thomas. I'd come home to you too, if you'd have me. I know it's fast. I know we barely know each other, but Eleanor, these past 2 weeks have shown me who you are in ways that years of ordinary living never could. You're brave and smart and fiercely protective of the people you care about. You saved my son, and you stood beside me when anyone else would have run. If that's not the foundation for something lasting, I don't know what is. Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. I'm broken, Cole. I lost a child, and I've never really healed from it. Some days I can barely look at Thomas without seeing Elizabeth, without remembering what I couldn't save. What kind of life is that to offer you? An honest one, Cole said simply. I'm not looking for perfect, Eleanor. I'm looking for real. And you're the most real person I've ever met. He reached across the table, taking her scarred hands in his. We're both broken in our own ways. Maybe that's exactly why we fit. She let the tears fall then, and Cole moved around the table to hold her while she cried. For her daughter, for his wife, for all the loss and fear and desperate hope that had brought them to this moment. And when the tears finally stopped, Eleanor looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and something like peace in her face. All right, she said. If we survive tomorrow, we'll try. We'll build something together and see where it leads. But, Cole, if something happens to you, if Grant— He won't, Cole said, with more confidence than he felt. We've got the law on our side, we've got a plan, and we've got each other. That's more than I've had in a long time. Morning came too quickly, as mornings before battles always do. Cole dressed carefully, leaving his gun behind as Coleman had instructed. They couldn't risk Grant claiming self-defense if things went wrong. Eleanor wore her best dress again, her hair pinned up severely, looking every inch the respectable businesswoman. They left Thomas with Mrs. Patterson, who'd agreed to watch him despite the danger. The walk to the bank felt like walking to an execution. Cole was hyper-aware of everything, the creak of boardwalks under their feet, the faces watching from windows, the weight of Eleanor's hand on his arm. Grant was already there, standing outside the bank with 2 of his men. He smiled when he saw them approaching, the expression cold and triumphant. Cole, Miss Hayes, so good of you to keep your word. Grant's eyes were flat, dangerous. Shall we go inside and conclude our business? Your men stay out here, Cole said. This is between us. Agreed. Though I notice Miss Hayes is joining us. Insurance, I presume? Witness, Eleanor corrected coolly. To ensure this transaction is conducted fairly and legally. Grant's smile widened. Of course, fairness, legality, such noble concepts. They entered the bank, which was empty except for the bank manager, Mr. Hensley, who nodded nervously and retreated to his office as planned. Cole knew Coleman and his men were positioned in the back rooms listening, but there was no sign of them. The main room felt cavernous, too open, too exposed. Well? Grant said, his patience clearly thin. Where are these alleged ledgers? Cole moved to the manager's desk, where a leather case sat waiting. It was empty except for blank ledgers Coleman had provided as props, but Grant couldn't know that from a distance. Right here. But before I turn them over, I want your confession. I want you to admit here and now that you killed your brother and framed me for it. Grant laughed, the sound ugly. You must think I'm an idiot. Why would I confess to anything? Because we both know the truth, Cole said quietly. Marcus discovered you'd been embezzling from the freight company. He was building a case against you, gathering evidence. So you killed him and blamed me, knowing I'd run rather than face a trial I couldn't win. That's an interesting story, Grant said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Shame you can't prove any of it. These ledgers prove it, Cole said, touching the case. Every transaction, every theft, every dollar you stole. Marcus documented everything, and now it's here, ready to destroy you. Grant's expression shifted, calculation replacing mockery. He moved closer, his hand drifting toward his jacket where Cole knew he carried a gun. Then I suppose I'll have to destroy them, and you along with them. In front of a witness? Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. In a bank in broad daylight? You're not that stupid, Mr. Hollis. Aren't I? Grant's hand closed on his gun. I've gotten away with worse. One more murder, one more witness silenced. What's the difference? The difference is that you're confessing, Coleman said, stepping out from the back room with his badge clearly visible, 3 deputies behind him with weapons drawn. Grant Hollis, you're under arrest for the murder of Marcus Hollis, for embezzlement, for attempted murder of Cole Mercer, and for threatening violence in front of federal witnesses. Grant's face went white, then red with fury. His hand was still on his gun, and for a terrible moment Cole thought he'd actually draw, thought this would end in gunfire and blood. But Coleman's deputies had their weapons trained on him, and even Grant's arrogance couldn't overcome those odds. You set me up, Grant hissed, looking at Cole with pure hatred. The ledgers don't exist, do they? This was all a trap. The ledgers existed, Cole said calmly. Marcus kept them, documented every crime you committed. You destroyed them when you killed him, but you couldn't destroy the truth. Too many people knew what you'd done, and eventually that truth caught up with you. You have no proof I killed Marcus, Grant spat. My word against yours and mine carries weight. We have your confession, Coleman said, recorded by 3 federal witnesses who heard you admit to killing your brother to destroy evidence of embezzlement. We have testimony from employees about your business practices. We have the letter Marcus Hollis wrote warning about your crimes, and we have Mr. Mercer's eyewitness account of the ledger's existence and Marcus's statements about them being insurance against dishonest partners. Grant's shoulders slumped as the reality of his situation sank in. His men outside, hearing the commotion, tried to enter but found themselves facing Sheriff Yates and his deputies. Within minutes, all of Grant's people were disarmed and restrained. It's over, Grant, Coleman said, moving forward with manacles. You're done. As they led Grant away in chains, Cole felt something inside him release, tension he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it. Eleanor's hand found his, squeezing tight, and he squeezed back, both of them shaking with relief and residual fear. Is it really over? Eleanor whispered. It's really over, Cole said, and believed it for the first time. The next hours were a blur of statements and paperwork. Cole gave his full testimony to Marshal Coleman, every detail of his time working for Grant, everything he'd witnessed the night Marcus died, everything that had happened since. Mr. Cross took notes furiously, already preparing the case that would ensure Grant never saw freedom again. By afternoon, word had spread through Ashford Creek. People emerged from their homes and businesses, gathering in the street to witness Grant and his men being loaded into a prison wagon for transport to the territorial capital. Some cheered, others simply watched with satisfaction, seeing a bully finally brought to justice. Mrs. Patterson brought Thomas to the sheriff's office, the baby awake and alert in her arms. Cole took his son with hands that still trembled slightly, held him close, breathed in that particular baby smell that meant home and hope and future. He was perfect, Mrs. Patterson said, smiling. Barely fussed at all. I think he knew his daddy was doing something important. Thank you, Cole said, for watching him, for believing in us, for everything. Thank you for showing us that sometimes the right thing to do is worth the risk, she replied. This town needed that reminder. As the prison wagon rolled out of town, Cole stood with Eleanor and Thomas, watching it disappear into the distance. Grant was gone, the bounty would be lifted, and for the first time in months, Cole could breathe without looking over his shoulder. What now? Eleanor asked quietly. Now we figure out how to build a life, Cole said. A real one, with no more running, no more fear. Sheriff Yates approached them, looking more relaxed than Cole had ever seen him. Well, you two certainly made my job interesting. I don't suppose you'd consider leaving town and making things boring again? Actually, Cole said, glancing at Eleanor, I was hoping to stay, if Ashford Creek will have me. The town council is meeting tonight to formally clear your name and welcome you as a resident, Yates said. I may have already put in a word about needing a deputy who can handle himself in difficult situations. Job's yours if you want it. Cole looked at Eleanor, saw the hope in her eyes, the tentative smile that said she wanted this too. I want it, he said. I want all of it. The weeks that followed were busy with building a new life from the ashes of the old. Cole started work as Deputy Mercer, earning the respect of townspeople who'd once feared him. Eleanor's business thrived as she became known not just as an apothecary, but as the woman who'd stood up to Grant Hollis and won. And Thomas grew, healthy and happy, cared for by two people who loved him with everything they had. 3 months after Grant's arrest, on a cold January morning, Cole and Eleanor stood in the small church where she'd introduced him to her daughter's grave. The same minister who'd buried Elizabeth now married them in a simple ceremony attended by the whole town. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears. Sheriff Yates served as witness. And Thomas, now 4 months old and thriving, slept peacefully in Mrs. Miller's arms through the entire service. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed Eleanor gently, tasting salt from tears she didn't bother hiding. These were good tears, healing tears, the kind that came from allowing yourself to hope again after believing hope was lost. They walked out of the church together into bright winter sunshine, and the townspeople threw rice and cheered. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, wasn't the future they'd imagined before loss had reshaped them. But it was real, and it was theirs, built on a foundation of shared struggle and hard-won trust. That evening, in the home they now shared above the apothecary, Eleanor nursed Thomas while Cole prepared dinner. It was domestic and ordinary and absolutely perfect. The baby fed contentedly, his small hand gripping Eleanor's finger with the casual possession of a child who knew he was loved. "Do you think Sarah would approve?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Of us? Of this?" Cole thought about his first wife, about the woman who'd loved him enough to see past his mistakes to who he could become. "I think she'd be glad Thomas has you. I think she'd be grateful he's not growing up alone, that he has someone who'll teach him to be strong and kind and brave." "And what about you? Is she glad you have me?" Cole came to sit beside them, looking at his small family, his son, his wife, the life they were building together. "I think she'd be glad I'm not alone anymore, that I found someone who understands that love doesn't replace what was lost, but it can heal what was broken." Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long time, watching Thomas nurse and then fall asleep, watching the lamplight paint shadows on the walls, watching their future unfold in the quiet moments between then and now. Outside, Ashford Creek settled into evening, a town that had seen violence and fear and had chosen compassion instead. The same streets that had nearly turned Cole away now welcomed him home. The same people who'd been too scared to help had become friends and neighbors and family. In the cemetery behind the church, 2 graves held memories of the people they'd lost. Sarah Mercer, who'd died bringing new life into the world. Elizabeth Hayes, who'd lived too briefly but had been loved completely. They were gone but not forgotten, woven into the fabric of this new life like threads of gold in dark cloth. And in a house above an apothecary shop, a man who'd been running found a place to rest. A woman who'd been broken found a reason to heal. And a baby who'd nearly died in his father's arms grew strong and healthy, surrounded by a love he'd one day understand was forged in fire and tempered by loss. They'd all come to Ashford Creek desperate and afraid, carrying more pain than any person should have to bear. And somehow, in the crucible of shared danger and unlikely alliance, they'd found what they'd been searching for without knowing they were searching. Not rescue, not salvation, but something better and more lasting. They'd found home and family, and the fierce, stubborn, beautiful kind of love that survives because it's been tested and proven true. Thomas stirred in Eleanor's arms, making a small sound of contentment before settling deeper into sleep. Cole reached out to touch his son's soft hair, then Eleanor's hand, connecting them all in a circle of belonging. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saving him, for saving me." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady and full of promise. "We saved each other. That's how family works." And in the quiet of that January evening, with snow beginning to fall outside and warmth filling every corner of their small home, Cole Mercer finally understood what it meant to be free. Not from the past. That would always be part of him. But free to build a future worth having, with people worth loving, in a place worth calling home. The journey that had started with a dying baby and a desperate father had led here, to this moment of peace and possibility. And though the road had been hard and the cost had been high, Looking at the life they'd built from the ruins of what they'd lost, Cole knew with absolute certainty that every mile, every struggle, every moment of fear had been worth it. Because this family, this love, this home was worth everything. And it was just the beginning.